All point of views expressed on ShopTalk360 are solely the point of views of the individuals and do not represent any company, organization, or group. ShopTalk360, the industry's dedicated platform for commercial design, construction, and facilities. With more than 25 years building for national retail brands, an award-winning and best-selling author, keynote speaker, industry coach, and event producer, here's our host of Shop Talk 360, Grace Daly.
Hey, Shop Talkers, welcome to Shop Talk 360 Chats. So excited to have join us Jim Wexler, President of Experiences Unlimited and Persona Labs. Hey, Jim, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Grace. How are you?
I'm doing well, hanging in there, trying to hang in there like everyone else. Jim, you have an incredible, fascinating background, and maybe you can share a little bit about your background and what you're currently working on.
Well, I think you have to go all the way back to talk about this. You know, we're going to talk today about games and game-based learning and gamification. The start of this for me is, without dating myself, all the way back to the pre-web era. It was in the 90s. In a pioneering way, I actually was a filmmaker, and then back then started hearing this new term, which was interactive. Interactive, what is that? Didn't even know the word, interactive. And to accelerate this conversation a little, I hooked up with a fellow who was a pioneer in interactive thinking, later became my business partner. And we started making interactive stuff. Interactive meant things that people could interface with on a computer. And there was no web. We were primarily doing either CD-ROMs or kiosks, which were placed in facilities and banks and such, where people could have an interactive experience. Or the new thing was salespeople's laptops, because salespeople were carrying laptops and starting to use them for presentations. Anyway, that's where we got our start. And it ended up that the production studio that we were using were also game makers. They were early pioneers of making commercial video games for the commercial market. This is before there were even PlayStations or anything. They were making CD-ROM based games. And what happened was we started to see that what they were doing with gaming was far more exciting than we were doing making presentations for the laptop. And we started to think about how to incorporate that into business. And I started making calls on top companies suggesting they make games for their brands. Games for their brands. They didn't know what I was talking about. But I got some early pioneers, and we made General Mills' first game, which was a game starring their brand that they put in the cereal box. And we made Coca-Cola's first game, which was distributed as a prize, like a Happy Meal prize at restaurants. Buy the kids' meal and get not a plastic figurine, but a game on disc. Mm-hmm. And so we started making these games for companies, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, Energizer, The Gap. And that was how the business started. Games that were used promotionally. And the thinking by the brands was that they could get people, mostly young people, to spend hours and hours and hours with the brand. So it was good for messaging, while it was also promotional. It was a response mechanism. You had to buy something to get the disc. That's how we got our start. And we ran that business quite successfully for a number of years. What started happening was clients started saying, can you do for us and our brand and our employer brand what you're doing for the kids? Meaning, can you make a game out of our company so that we can train our people better? One of the early ones was Merrill Lynch, where we did a day in the life of the investment banker on CD-ROM that was delivered to college students to get them interested in working for Merrill. And my bridge from doing games that were used for consumers, mostly young consumers, to games that were used by enterprise to improve workforce performance started around then. And that's going back 15, 20 years ago. So my background was inventing games for business, which led into a a business where grown-up kids would use games to understand how to do their jobs better.
That's absolutely fascinating. So fast forward now with Experiences Unlimited and Persona Labs, how long have you had your business there?
We've been in business for going back to 2012, so it's 8 years now. We're a company, we're based in New York, and for a number of years now, we've been pioneers of sorts in the use of games and game-based learning in helping improve the performance of the workforce, and sometimes in driving engagement with the customers and consumers as well. So it's been an innovative path to help large companies and small do a better job in preparing their people or engaging their people through the effectiveness and the magic of game-based delivery. And of late, meaning the last few years, we've used measurement and assessments that are woven into these game-based experiences to pull data out of their participation to understand customers and employees better and help them further.
That's so important, especially now with our current state of affairs with COVID, as we continue to journey through COVID-19, which looks like it's gonna be a while, probably into late next year and possibly the year after that. So how are you helping folks who are working or looking to hire people to work remotely?
Well, it's interesting. First of all, if you think about what we're all suffering in the COVID era, it's just puts more of an emphasis on the kind of things that I've been doing for a while. The digital delivery of experiences, the digital delivery of communications and material that matters that much more now than it ever has. It's going to accelerate a trend to have us as citizens and consumers and employees depend on computers and computer interfaces to get our work done or to shop or to interact with each other. It is evolutionary that we use these devices like the one that we're sharing in this Zoom call today to communicate and to complete our tasks. And that's just been accelerated somewhat in the modern era. This notion that we all have now of understanding the parameters of how to Zoom with each other and keep the kids quiet and work remotely are a new byproduct. Many people worked remotely on some level, but now we're all doing it. For us, there are two things that come to mind that are accelerated by COVID. One is that we need to get our information through machines almost completely now. And the notion for example, for a marketer to pay attention to the power of and the effectiveness of and the importance of the design of the interface through which we deliver material has accelerated. If I'm a retailer or an employer and I realize that I have important things to communicate, the quality of the interface, the quality of the user experience is everything. If I don't, and you're going to have people tuning into this, thankfully it's well lit and it's functional, so people may actually continue through this conversation. But when it comes to designing your website or your learning materials or your e-commerce portal, consumers demand that the user interface be effective, efficient, well-designed, and they'll deny it outright if it isn't designed well enough to earn their eyeballs. So that's a key thing, is the understanding that the creator of messaging and the deliverer of content has to do a better than average job of making that interface work. The other thing I mentioned data and measurement. The other thing that marketers and employers need to do better and more moving forward is pull data and analytics that come out of these experiences. You can think of it almost as the Amazonification of everything, because we expect when we shop, for example, for the interfaces to be intelligent. If I buy X, I expect the marketer or the portal to know more about me and make recommendations moving forward based on that data. Well, that notion applies to everything. If I have an employee and I'm training them I expect my employer to deliver messaging intelligently. And if I continue to get material from my employer or send my customers material, for example, that doesn't show that I'm learning from their past use, they'll become unengaged. They will not think of us as smart or a good use of their time. So it's ever more important to design the experience well as measure well moving forward.
Yep. So, so what specifically changed in your business with COVID now? Are you finding more people coming to you because they're looking to try to identify the folks that would be successful for working remotely?
Sure. I'll give you a couple of examples. First of all, as I've sort of described, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm sort of on the right side of the ledger. You've got a lot of facilities-oriented listeners and viewers. Some of them are struggling because people aren't walking into facilities. I've always been remote, so the fact is that I've prepared my toolbox to create these experiences and this messaging, and I think we'll talk about gamification in games as part of this. And so I'm relatively busy supporting customers and having more people come to the games and the courseware that I've created over time. That's one thing. And as an example of that, you had an associate of mine on a recent Shop Talk, Glenn Singleton.
Mm-hmm.
Glenn operates a very effective business and has done for 25 years, delivering workshops in diversity and inclusion. He's a facilities-based practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
He goes into either corporate facilities or he rents out hotels. He runs workshops and seminars, etc. His business came to a complete standstill in March, and he no longer has any bookings to travel anywhere to teach anyone anything live. So his pivot and ours was to take his live workshop and immediately turn it into something that people could do remotely. It's a 3-part product where there's semi-live lecture through Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
There's live avatar-based interactions that take place in a learning mode. And the app that we're launching is one that allows people like you and me to have a self-led experience of the diversity and inclusion protocols that he teaches. And we're well positioned to deliver something not only that is effective, because games and game-based delivery is effective, but we're actually filling a void. The practitioners who cannot visit any longer, not only Glenn, but the thousands of people who are trying to drive forward the notion of diversity and inclusion in the coming year, will have to turn to tools like these. So that the pivot is to deliver and create remote learning that is engaging and effective. The other side of that, and I think you were hinting at it, is that I have an offering where we do assessments. They're called psychometric assessments, which are tests that are used to measure a person's personality and their attributes, their predisposition to be able to do well at a job. There are tests for every job role, from facilities manager to sales manager to frontline worker and so on. And those tests in the library have been used for years to help people decide who to hire, or at least to prioritize who they consider for a job. We created quickly a new test, and it was a pivot for us to create something called the remote worker assessment, using validated science about the attributes that comprise people who are good at working remotely. We created this measure, and it's been fairly successful, where companies who are hiring or companies who need to look at their own workforce to determine who's going to be good at remote working and how to coach them are taking advantage of this new tool. So it's an offering and an instrument for our times.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I'll share with our audience that, yes, I took those tests. So that was very interesting for me. And it did open my eyes to a lot of things I already innately knew about myself, but it brought it out on paper, which is a little scary. But it was actually a very good exercise. You touched a little bit on gamification. I haven't tried the gamification process yet. I did the more, was it psychoanalysis test? Is that what
right?
I did that process. So I'm interested in the gamification, but share with us a little bit about that, because that sounds very unique. You know, we live in a culture where a lot of my kids, even some adults, they love to play on games as a way to kind of relax, like decompress from the day. So with your gaming process, you're actually able to pull personality traits from that and the way they play. Is that what it is?
Well, yeah, it's two parts. First, think about this notion of gamification. It's a term that's been coined. Maybe your viewers have heard it. It's been used in the last few years, and it's a fancy term for something very simple. It's the idea of getting people to do stuff playfully. It is really motivating people, usually through an interface, to do more. First, just take a step back and think about games themselves. Why, Grace, has gaming become the art form of the 21st century, maybe the way film was in the 20th century and the novel was in the 19th century? Why is it so popular as a communication form, as an art form? And you have to sort of go all the way back to caveman days to understand why games are effective now. In caveman time, to survive, to evolve, our ancestors had to master challenges, deal with fire, sharpen the spear, create tools. All of those challenges that allowed them to survive rewarded them. When they overcame a challenge and mastered it, there was a hit or a secretion of dopamine into their brain that rewarded them and gave them a good feeling for having succeeded. And that evolutionary power of rewarding us for succeeding in a challenge is a key driver of motivation. If you take a gamer now, one of our kids, for example, and you hook them up to an MRI machine and have them play a game, when they master a challenge in the game, the dopamine flows. It's the same process, even though it's an artificial environment. There's a chemical and evolutionary and very primitive reason that we become, that we're motivated to master challenges. And that is why games are so effective. So if you take the principles of gaming are actually reflective of the things that drive us in life. And that's why they're popular and that's why they're effective. So gamification is taking some of those principles of gaming, which are mastering challenges, as I just said. Another is giving people a sense of control and autonomy. Another is giving them a sense of purposefulness in what they're doing, that there's a reason that what they're doing is important, not only for them, but beyond them. Those are the key drivers of human motivation, and those are the things that go into game design. So whether you're creating a game that depicts the world or depicts a process, like we're going to do with diversity, so that people are going through a simulation of content and experiencing it, or whether you're just using those design principles to make the interface on your website more engaging, gamification and game thinking, game design are effective for improving performance and improving engagement, which is the goal here. So that we've been doing this for a while, for a long time, making commercial games, making promotional games, and now making games for learning. But that's the real underpinning of it. Is if you're going to design a website or an interface or a Zoom frame or anything, it's possible to look at the things that make games successful to make your communication more successful. And then you mentioned the data. Just as in games are intelligent. They use AI to learn from what you did to make the game continually competitive and interesting. And in parallel, as people participate, if you measure their responses and measure how they act, it's possible to draw conclusions. Maybe you could sell them more things or teach them more things, but also to make the experience refined and engaging for that person. So these are the things that we're doing. In its simplest form, it means creating experiences that drive people to participate more.
You're like the perfect person I know to ask this. So would you say that gamification process and the way it's modeled, would that be similar to the way we interact and the way individuals may treat their social media? So people like the likes, right? Oh, they post something on LinkedIn or Facebook. They want the likes. They're looking for the likes. They're looking for the interaction. Is that it's all kind of in the same vein?
Yeah, well, that motivationally speaking, those points and that leaderboard, I guess, that is I have more likes, I have more status, are motivational drivers. So yes, Facebook or Instagram have a lot of features in them that are gamified, that continue to drive us. It's not only the content, photos sent by Grace that I look at and I like, but the overall design of it keeps us flowing, makes me continue to return to it, and gives me a reward for my participation, which is others liking mine, me liking others, the feedback that comes from that. So there are some natural and innate systems built into how we interact with any interface that are using game principles, and these can be your designers, your instructional designers, or your marketing communications practitioners can capitalize on those or try to emphasize those to get you your fair share of clicks or your fair share of time spent interacting. It's a design principle, ultimately, gamification.
Very interesting. And of course, that now after I asked you that last question, I just realized I dated myself because, like I said, Facebook. I probably should have said something cooler like TikTok. It seems to be very generational on who's using what application for, specifically for social media.
They sure seem to go fairly rapid fire, don't they?
Yeah.
As an example, I've got kids who are teenagers, and they won't use Facebook. I mean, they're still data slaves to the company. They're on Instagram, et cetera, but they don't communicate on Facebook. They don't really use email and so on. And one's younger than the other. One's more TikTok than the other. Just generationally, they're 3 years apart, yet there seems to be a quick turnover in the popularity of these apps and
certainly is.
Usefulness to young people.
Certainly. Okay, so I think you answered the questions. My next question, which is about gamification, and it is obviously very relevant then in this year, 2020, now probably more than ever.
Sure. In a couple of ways. The average employer now has people who won't be able to have that face-to-face experience we're very used to having, define engagement and work, the collaborative nature of that. Some of that can be replaced by tools like this. We're collaborating now, you and I, in this conversation. But there's something to be said for delivering concepts or experiences that can't be shared live any longer, and formatting deliverables that allow people to experience in a way that they find upbeat and positive and enjoyable. I'll give you one example that fits for the facilities industry, and then another that carries it beyond that. If you think about virtual tours of apartments when you're selling real estate, or a virtual tour of a facility, it was a time when that was nice to have. It may be for the average facility provider that they won't be able to imagine a future in which they don't give people a virtual tour. Someone who's booking a convention or a wedding, even 2 years out now, would have to be able to see the thing virtually. The quality of that experience reflects on the facility. You can have the nicest convention center, and if your tour is lackluster, then it seems as if the facility is lackluster. And so that toolbox matters. How we use electronic delivery and its depictions to forward our business it just has been raised. There, in terms of gamification, it may be, I'm inventing this as we speak, but it may be that there are protocols and ways to enhance a virtual tour of a real estate facility using some of these dynamics I'm describing that would make people stay longer, share it more with their colleagues, return more, or have a better overall experience. And those are worthy of exploration by your viewers if they want their fair share of facilities customers. But I give you another example. In a sense, that's a simulation of a facilities tour, and you're using the benefit of game-based tools to improve that experience for the viewer. It works for everything. If you think about simulation, I have a colleague who is a pilot at United, and he told me a couple of years ago that there are no pilots in the U.S. There's not one single pilot who has not now taken off from LaGuardia and then suffered a double bird strike in the cockpit and then landed safely on the Hudson, just like Captain Schellenberger did so many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that every pilot has done it is because of flight simulators. It's the earliest industry where they, for safety reasons and for the protection of the $100 million plane, created very robust simulators that can simulate any condition. And it's important because a pilot might fly 30,000 hours and have nothing happen, but they have to be ready for the one thing that might happen. And these things can only be simulated. Otherwise, they cannot experience it before it happens. So what the pilot told me is that it's really easy to suffer the goose strike and land in the Hudson. Anyone can do it who's a pilot. What's difficult is what Schellenberger did. It happened live, and he had a couple of seconds to summon all of his experience and everything he'd ever learned in order to make the decisions that he made at that moment. And most of the experiences that he was calling on, he'd experienced artificially. He'd experienced them in flight simulators.
Mm-hmm.
And it made no difference to his decision-making process, the choices he made, or his success, whether it was artificial or real, that experience. And that notion of that he played the flight simulator game of sorts. He did it for scores and scores of hours, and later on it affected his decision-making process positively. You can do that. We do that with salespeople, where we create conversations in which they talk to customers through branching dialogue, make decisions, and get coached. You can put a salesperson through the most arcane sales experiences without them ever having to blow the sale or be live with a customer through simulation. So the notion that those simulations are games. They're really games that aren't that much fun. They are environments in which decisions are made, where resources are called upon, and then you get some coaching. And for any business or any topic, it's possible to imagine depicting something so that the user can have that experience artificially. And as you were asking me, that's that much more prevalent in an era now where having that life experience is less likely.
Sure. So now, how would a company measure their success? Is it by the success of the person they're hiring, then that they do fit the role and that they are excelling and they're all closing on sales? Is that how they're measured?
Yeah, ultimately, yes. So if you've got, first of all, you can use the measures we talked about, those psychometric assessments, to determine who to even hire or who to put into the slot. If you usually people, it's about 100 to 1. If I need to hire 10 salespeople for my facility, I'm probably going to take 1,000 resumes and then look closely at 100 people. And it may be for those 100 people, I want to put them through a hiring manager and interview them and look at their background and make sure their reputation management is clean. But I also could look at what they're made of, whether they are predisposed to do well at the job. And it could influence my decision about how to prioritize the resume pile or ultimately who to hire. So that screen, or that ability to understand if they're predisposed to do well, is an established part of the talent management hiring process. Then when I bring them in, it is possible to put them into these simulations so that I can see how they'll perform on the job, to understand their strengths and weaknesses from a skill perspective, and maybe to give them some coaching. If I do that using some of the data I got from the assessment, then it'll be a very informed teaching and coaching process. Ultimately, I'll determine whether I hired right and whether the performance in the simulation was accurate based on their performance data. How did they do in the job? But companies that do this over a period of time, even let's say the first year, can start to correlate what attributes did my people have and were they successful. I thought I needed assertive people, but maybe my salespeople who demonstrated curiosity performed well, and that's a factor in how I think about those in the future. It's not unlike, we were talking about Amazonification. It's not unlike Amazon looking at our purchasing patterns and making informed choices about what we might be interested in buying. I'm going to look at the performance patterns of my people to determine who to hire next. It's using data to make informed decisions. It's more prevalent than ever, and AI and computers make it possible to do this more than it ever was before.
It's interesting. I had this thought, it popped into my mind that, what would be really interesting gamification is for many of us, I know myself included, is how we can, with this whole COVID process we're going through for probably the next year, how we can be healthier, lose weight, and exercise. Because I know myself and a lot of people will probably need that. Do you have an app for that, or do you have some sort of gamification for that?
Well, it's so interesting you say that. First of all, I think in my own personal life, I have a couple of apps that I downloaded for free, that tell me how many steps I took.
Yes.
In a day. And that's a gamification example. You're supposed to potentially do 10,000 steps a day. Well, now I look and I say, wow, I've only walked 6,000 today. In New York, we walk a lot. Mm-hmm. I haven't only walked 6,000. Maybe I'll go out for a walk. Well, that tool motivated me to remember, and there are a lot of things built into it, reminders and things that come out of it that drive that further. There are also fitness apps that help you measure and respond to the calories you're taking in and so on. But interestingly, for COVID, there's a couple things we're doing and a couple things on the drawing board that are highly relevant to these crazy times we're living in. We have a product called Uptick. It's usually used for training salespeople, and it's a series of conversations that depict and simulate the cycle of sales so that salespeople can practice. And it spits out a lot of data so managers will understand their strengths and weaknesses. We created in a pivot quickly some COVID readiness modules. They depict the manager speaking to the salespeople about their success or lack of it during the COVID period. There are an awful lot of hard-charging salespeople who are frustrated by their inability to get through to the customer during these last few months. And this module coaches your people on how to keep their chin up or how to rethink the situation for today's news. But even more interesting is something that's on the drawing board now that we're working on, that is return to work COVID readiness modules. I have a client that has customers that need to assure that people are ready when they're returning to work, meaning they're going to adhere and comply with key return to work protocols. Things like wearing a mask and keeping socially distant and washing your hands is one side of it. But there's a conversational side, a way to talk to people so that they understand culturally what we're expecting of them in the workplace, and mostly understanding their objections. Are they ready to comply, or do they have some problems with the protocols, so that conversation can be had before they walk into the building. And part of this is for when we do finally return to work. Part of this is compliance. I want my people to follow the rules, but others of it is coaching them or developing their readiness to accept a new way of working. And so it's a modern example of capturing the content and simulating it for people before they actually go live. It's not quite landing the plane on the Hudson, but it is preparing people with new protocols so that they are ready to perform well.
Yep. So I feel like now as a country, globally, but especially as a country, we're very polarized, and there's push and pull. Even something as simple as the mask discussion. We chatted on this earlier. I tend to follow science and medicine. And I don't know, somewhere along the line, Jim, I just kind of feel like people stop believing in science and medicine. And that's a little concerning.
Well, I join you in that concern, and I think people are seeing it now. I live in my own bubble too, I suppose. So being an adherence to science at the beginning, and then we're seeing the results. Our country is not doing as well on its COVID response as in almost any other country because of that lack of adhering to science and lack of leadership. I really can imagine everybody in the country pulling together as one if they'd been advised to do so from the top.
Sure, I agree with you on that.
But I'm on the side of science.
Yes.
I'll give you an example. It may be goes back to the COVID thing I was just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that the diagnostic or the test, the assessment, would help the deliverer of the test, maybe the employer or the government, understand if someone is predisposed to adhere. And it may be that 80% of people are perfectly ready to adhere, and there's a portion that would refuse. Well, if we spend 100% of our time with 100% of the people, if that 20% is not going to ever respond, then that's actually an effort wasted. This is a metaphor for a lot of things, but
sure.
You want to be able to focus the right message on the right people at the right time, and doing it blindly is less insightful and intelligent than doing it with focus. It may be that there's a way to communicate to help change their mind. It may be that that 20% needs to hear a more authoritarian or obedient message, and other people who are ready for the science in a different way. We are able to segment our audience based on their past performance, based on their personality and their makeup and their predisposition, and harnessing that, whether it's for public health or to sell more facilities or any other purpose, is in hand. I mean, now more than ever, this is a message. You've got facilities and operational people who are on their heels because of the non-public nature of our country right now. But no matter what, this is a time of tremendous disruption where using different tools in different ways to accomplish our goals it is in front of us, and it's almost obvious that we're going to have to think of things differently. Just as a bit of inspiration for the viewers, I sometimes do these. Get invited to speak before audiences, and a couple of years ago, I was invited to speak to an audience of commercial printers about innovation. And it's a tough call because they're not innovative. Commercial printers kind of blew it. They figured they were in the printing business, making paper and substrates, not necessarily in the communications business. They could have, owned the internet, and instead, their commercial printing business has fallen off by half over the last 20 odd years. But I tried to give them some inspiration, and that is that the disruption that's occurring to them is occurring to everybody. I wouldn't want to be the commercial printing guy, but I wouldn't want to be the Facebook guy or the gamification guy either. The universe continues to change at an evolutionary pace, and disrupting the future is the definition of innovation. It's just that it's only disruptive to people who aren't ready to innovate. This is a time when we're all hunkering down to think about what business we're in and how we can use technology and tools like we're describing today to beat the competition and deliver value to the customer. And it's wide open. It's disruptive as hell, but it's also an opportunity for an innovator.
Absolutely. So the only constant is that change is constant. So I think about your uptick, your program, the newest module you have for COVID. So are there discussions in there that we gently maybe present to folks? I mean, you can identify which folks may be more adaptable to adhering to wearing masks and certain protocols for the new wave coming soon once we're going back to work, right, with the new procedures. But are there ways to have discussions with maybe that 20% that they would be more acceptable to understand and accept science?
Absolutely. Well, there's a couple things here. Either there's a way to speak to their orientation and their instinct to be more convincing. It may be that you want to make sure they understand a science-based message, or it might be that there's a way to have them come closer to adhering to some protocol or compliance by speaking to them in a way that makes sense to them. It could be that it's whether it's obeying the leader or patriotism, or really there are a number of ways to frame a message so that it is convincing for people. And it might not be dressing up a science message. It may be that there's a more straightforward socially binding message or one that appeals to them as a member of a society that would make sense. The fact is that research and then data and then the correct depiction of content is how you'll get there. In other words, there's a way to speak to every single customer or every single employee, so to maximize the engagement value and effectiveness of the message. It just has to be ascertained through research and then have those messages created. So the answer is yeah, there's a way to move the needle with everybody. You can't do it, you can't hammer somebody. You have to speak to them in their own language.
Absolutely. And it's unfortunate, but I do read articles that come up, and you always hear it that in the last couple of weeks where someone says, oh, I shouldn't have gone to that party, and I went to the party because the people are having COVID parties, and they go to a party and people end up getting sick, end up in the hospital, and they're like, no, this is for real. I always kind of feel like people don't understand something unless it affects them personally or someone or a loved one. It's unfortunate it has to go down that route until they finally accept it and grasp it and listen to science and medicine. But that seems to be the case with some of the population.
Well, I'll give you another example. First of all, that's true. And if you think about simulation in the way we were talking about, can you imagine depicting the horror of a bad outcome from a COVID party so that someone maybe changed their mind before they actually went would be might be effective. But the example I was going to use is the diversity and inclusion process and the thing we're going to market with for Courageous Conversation. If you take 100% of the population, there's a portion that is less responsive to the diversity and inclusion message. I mean, most people recognize that inclusiveness, for example, and fairness are important aspects of our society. And the needle's only moved on that this last summer, where it's become evident that more and more people want society to be fair and equal, and less people don't mind that it's not. But there's a message for everybody, even in the diversity and inclusion experience that's delivered to employees through this self-led app. Some will be adherents and thought leaders and I don't know, inclusion ambassadors within the organization, which is important because it has to be cross-pollinated. Part of what's going on in lack of inclusiveness is people aren't talking. We work side by side, but I never really thought about Joe's feelings, and I just carried through my day. And this app is meant to make you realize better how each other are feeling. There's going to be a closed-minded, I don't want to be pejorative, there's going to be a closed-minded portion of my workforce that has no interest in this topic. There's still a way to talk to them about the goal of including people. It might be different than for the future ambassadors, but there is a way that helps them understand. It parallels what you were saying about COVID. And that is first thing you need to know before you speak to them in a way that makes sense to them is what their makeup is, and that comes from data. It's possible to ask a series of short questions in an assessment mode and have a really good idea on how to segment your audience to create messaging that works for them more effectively. Marketers know this, and employers who are trying to improve workforce performance can use it as well. That's my business, is harnessing the data to understand the audience's needs better and then create experiences that they find meaningful and engaging.
Okay. So jumping back to remote learning, as it stands today, and it's going to be in our future for a while. Now, what are some good examples do you feel are of a remote learning, and what are some maybe bad examples or not so good examples?
Well, the notion that, and this is not necessarily my field of expertise overall, but the notion that everything should be the way it was, yet done remotely, is probably erroneous. I'll give you just a personal example. When I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to customers, seeking new customers, talking to people. It's consultative, and we're talking about these highfalutin concepts like the gamifying their their employee communications process. It's not a hammer and nail. It requires discussion and thought. And over the last few months, at least, no one was in the mood much for a hard-charging conversation about gamifying their communications process. They were too busy scurrying and determining and trying to carry on. Mm-hmm. So you saw, for example, that in the last few months that the way that you interacted with people had to be more humane. I don't think I've had a call in the last 3 months where I didn't spend on a Zoom, for example, several minutes speaking to people about their experience. Where you been? How did it go? What happened? What about the kids? What's going on with you? Mm-hmm. And that's something that's been missing from a business discourse over time. Most salespeople try hard to establish relationships and have a human connection, but that's counterbalanced by go mentality. Yep. And how many times have you had a call in your life where someone says, I've got a hard stop in 15, and they're multitasking and on their phone while you're talking and not really connecting with you? It's because we live in a society where we assign a lot of value to busyness. And I think you were asking about remote worker. I think that people who go for quality over quantity and have tried to eliminate the artificial busyness from their lives to have a more human connection are having success. I've noticed it, that I've made a lot of friends in the last few months. I don't know if I've sold a lot of product, but I've certainly connected with people in a way that's more fulfilling and more sustaining, and maybe to lead to business, but it's just the new normal is to connect and be humane. And I think that's a change. And managers who don't recognize that need in their people, so are still mad about quota without recognizing that and so on, are probably having less success.
Sure. And I always, it goes back to, I'm going to paraphrase, there's a quote that says, people always remember the way they were treated or how you treated them, right? So it's, I just kind of feel like this whole time period is people will remember, and how important is that, just to connect with folks on an emotional level? Because at the end of the day, that's all we can do right now until we're over this hump.
I completely agree. Well, even you and I, Grace, we met a few years ago, and we had a cordial friendship. We were always pretty friendly. Mm-hmm. But I remember when we spoke for the first time a few months ago, or whenever that was, a couple months ago, when we talked for the first time in a while, it was very connective. We had a really nice conversation about where you've been and where I was and what was going on. It was different than, data and gamification and facilities. We had a more positive conversation. And whether it rewards either of our professional lives, it was personal and it was connective. And I really wonder, because you've seen ebbs and flows over the years of the way people operate, and we live in a very advanced and data-centric time. But this human part is valuable and interesting. I'll take it back to your audience, largely facilities people. One of the changes that has to happen in inviting people into a physical space is that data and measurement still has to be part of it, whether it's, knowing who they are with geolocated devices so that you can tailor their visit more effectively, even though they're a physical person in the space. They've got the phone, it's connected. This device is an appendage. And so how do I take advantage of personalizing my facilities visit for that person based on the data that is readily available from their mobile phone? That's an innovation that facilities people need to continue to explore and grow with. But overall, when it's time for people to spend more time visiting, the humaneness, the personalization, the Amazonification of that experience is what's going to be the make or break for customer relationships. I think it's even more going to be in the live setting than I'm able to conduct with remote courseware or via Zoom calls. So it's in their hands to do two things: be human mm-hmm. and use data to make it even more personal. And the prize will go to those who can innovate in that way. I really believe.
Absolutely. Um, I just think about, you brought a very good point, Jim, about the busyness, right? Everyone's like multitasking, and we live in a society where at one point it's like, okay, how much can you accomplish? There's busyness. It's almost like busyness just to be busy. And I'm the first one to say, like, with this whole COVID experience, it's actually, with my business and what I do, it's actually helped me take a pause to relook at where I really want to be, who I want to be having discussions with, whether it's with you or with Glenn Singleton, and what's really important to me and how I want to position and shape Shop Talk 360 go forward. Because everyone can be busy, right? But then at the end of the day, what does it really mean? We're not in the business to be busy. We're in the business to contribute and to share and to help one another at the end of the day. It's really about just helping one another. And I think that somehow got lost. And maybe with COVID and everyone taking this little bit of a pause, maybe people will be repositioned to.
I agree. I also, I think you think back to the hard charging eras that we've experienced. You could even go back to the 80s when
Sure.
business was this notion that it's only about the profit and only about that accomplishment versus some level of personal happiness. We see it even now in this in the way in which regulation is being batted around at a governmental level. What's the balance between personal fulfillment and happiness and keeping people safe, et cetera, versus profit?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about culturally. Culturally, it may be that the average customer, citizen, employee will insist upon a level of humanness in their interactions that could change the dynamic about how people do business. I mean, you sort of see it in the advertising on television, where there's an awful lot of sympathy and empathy and humanness in the ads that are depicting things. You see it even in these street protests. It's people from all races, colors, and creeds coming out and saying, "Let's be fair." It's not. There's more people than ever who are, at least this summer, we're saying it's not cool to be unfair. And so we'll see. We're certainly at a crossroads. There's an election coming up, and there's a lot of things going on. But from a personal perspective, I can see people taking a pause and taking a step to figure out what's important to them, and to act on that and spend their time wisely, whether it's with their loved ones or with customers, and being selective about who you do business with based on the ability to get along or some human qualities besides dollars and cents. It may be a driver. And we're not kids anymore. But I think about my kids, who are just at the dawn of what will be careers, I assume, and they'll have jobs and lives, and they're very affected by this. People under 35, it may drive the culture, corporate culture, professional culture, for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Corporate responsibility. I'm in this space of talent acquisition and talent management, and there's some amazing data that young people will, more than half, will take a job for less money if the company's orientation and social purpose is higher.
Mm-hmm.
Work is a lifestyle for people now more than it was in a hierarchical culture of 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. You would join a company, they would say, jump, and you'd say, how high? Now people say, no, show me that you're humane. Show me your place in the world, your sense of purpose, and then I'll be motivated. And that may be accelerating too, that people will not want to work for companies that aren't environmentally sound or have good inclusion policies or provide appropriate home leave and so on. These are factors that may be on the upswing through COVID and post-COVID.
Sure.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I agree with all your points, and that leads to my next question. So where do you think this approach of remote learning will be in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think it's accelerating. One thing is that we're not going to go back to a world where we're not data connected. The mobile phone as appendage, the insistence by the consumer or the employee, the people, that the interfaces be intelligent. If you were going to go shopping and the website were poorly designed, or the shopping cart didn't remember you, or any number of things that we depend on now from these interfaces, you would no longer be a customer. And I think that orientation for intelligent networks, that we expect the machine to operate intelligently on our behalf, is going to increase. We will side with the providers of apps and electronic material that understand us and deliver value to us by understanding us. Same with retail. Retailers, electronic retailers, and even live retailers, the ones that understand us and continue to add value, not only on price, but by understanding who we are and what we need, are the ones that are going to succeed. So I don't know what the return to the facility will be like. I haven't been to my office in 5 months, and I'm operating just fine. It's a building. I miss my colleagues, but we're doing it remotely. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that return will be like, but no matter what, we've accelerated the baseline that says, allow me to operate remotely, deliver me meaningful information through the machine, remember who I am and be smart about it, and continue to grow that and develop it. I don't think there's any going back. So in 5 or 10 years, it may be that my expectation for the intelligence of the data that comes my way based on my own inputs that today will look primitive by that measure, that I will expect everything to be served up to me based on intelligent interfaces and data, and I will refuse to even engage unless it's done smartly. I go back to the sales, the uptick in the sales toolbox. I've been in sales, providing services to people for many, many years, and I've always been able to differentiate myself twofold. First, do the homework. Who are they? Mm-hmm. Now with the internet, you can read about anybody and anything and learn about them personally, and through their LinkedIn, etc., as well as their business operations. And it's always been shocking to customers that you're prepared. The bar is low. Most salespeople, most retail salespeople, most people who we engage with have not done the homework that they could have to prepare for that interaction. So I'm able to differentiate myself in that way. I think that the insistence on that will only grow, that it'll be expected that I am prepared by harnessing the data available to me to do the job. And then the other side of that is the humanness. With all that data, what is it doing? It's not creating room for me to manipulate. Ultimately, it's creating room for me to have a human relationship and establish a relationship with people. So it's this counterbalance between a level of data and then what is it for? And part of what it's for is to make room for human interactions and more meaningful interactions. It's going to be interesting to see that play out.
Yes, it will be. It will be, especially to your point too, with what you said earlier about the younger generation and how they're more based on experiences, but also aligning with other people and companies that are more socially conscious, so that'll be very, very interesting. I think back, and I'm dating myself now, but we spoke about this earlier. You said in the 80s when it was everyone, it's hardcore, make money, make the sale, close the sale. And I lived that for a very long time in corporate America for over 20 years, in the 90s. And I talked to some of my contractor friends and we joke around, especially nowadays, like, oh yeah, we were printing money back then, and now it's just with COVID, it's really kind of forced everyone to just take a pause and kind of relook globally. So we'll see where we go from here. Now to wrap up, what can facility managers and operations people take away from our conversation today?
Well, I think that it's a very rich time for anybody to take advantage of disruption to differentiate themselves. We've been talking about persuasion. The landscape for persuasion has completely changed. It used to be that you had very few people manage the radio and TV networks. They were in charge of how messaging went out to people. Now it's wide open. A kid in a garage, a college student, an entrepreneur can harness the data to do a better job of managing the relationship or the development of the relationship with key customers. It's a real opportunity to get sophisticated and take advantage of some of the tools we've been talking about and other things to lead. The playing field has been leveled because those large organizations are less innovative and they're flat-footed and they're not good at this as much as small entrepreneurial firms are. So my suggestion would be understand the young people and how they operate with electronics and technology and interfaces, and recognize that the ability to harness the data in order to forward your business is everything. If you're running a facility, the one thing that you can alter the facility to make it more appealing, and you can also alter how you manage and harness data to make it more appealing. Don't ignore that second one. More now than ever, I mean, this has been my rallying cry for people for a while, but now more than ever, the victory, the prize will go to those who think clearly about data and how it can change behavior and apply it to their business. And the future, in that way, the future's bright because we're just getting started on this data journey.
Sure. Absolutely. I feel like there's so much more we need to cover, and we definitely have to have a follow-up call because I feel like we just touched barely enough in this past hour. But let's touch base again and see where we're at and have some maybe more in-depth discussions about gamification. That's fascinating to me. Absolutely.
I'd love to. And for those of your viewers who have made it through our hour, some will have done it and not believe an hour passed. Others will have said that was I need a cold shower now after that long conversation. But I do want them to know that certain of these offerings, like the remote worker assessment that helps you understand your people, and the uptick COVID modules. These are things, the COVID modules are available for free. They can look at them and use them and maybe apply them to their business. Anyone who wanted to can take a look at this remote worker assessment and see if it's meaningful to them. I want them to know that we were talking about some tools that are worthy of exploration, and that if they contacted you or whatever, we'd let them look at them for free. I'm really interested in the dialogue and the human dialogue with your viewers about what we've talked about, and see if they want to check them out or if there's any feedback. So I hope it's the beginning of a conversation with some of your viewers.
No, Jim, where can the audience reach out to you?
Well, if you go to my website, which is the one that offers these things that I'm talking about, is called personalabs.com. It's persona-labs.com. There you can just email me or call me or make a request to get the assessments or the COVID modules.
Sure.
And that's probably the best way. You read about it a little and decide if any of it's of interest, and be in touch.
Okay. I haven't taken the COVID model yet. I might do that and see how I do.
I'd be very glad to send it to you and get your feedback.
All right, great. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. This was every time we chat and I walk away, I feel like I learned something new, and especially in that whole sector of what you do, which is mind-boggling to me. I really appreciate you taking the time this morning to chat with me.
It's been great. I'm really glad to talk to you, and thanks for the chance.
Okay, let's keep in touch, and we will definitely have a follow-up soon. Thanks, Jim.
Take care, Grace.
Thanks for joining Shop Talk 360, real conversations in the commercial design, construction, and facilities industry. You can reach out to us at grace@gracedaily.com.